My name is Pule Mulebadzi, bringing you life-altering stories of change makers, nation builders, Africans who are dedicated to positive change. Welcome to Bophelong. Her story left many stunned and those close to her concerned that her rare medical scare may cut her life short. Today she is back to her healthy, happy self, and she often jokes about her peculiar companion, Nelsie the worm, that lived in her brain for years. Take a look. Santi Nell has created a name for herself as a well-established author whose story inspires many to cherish the gift of life and to better prepare for its inevitable changes. Today, many have come to learn the story behind her popular tale, Nelsie the Worm, through local magazine and Sanlam's Life Surprises survey.
If Nelsie didn't happen, I wouldn't have written any books. I wouldn't have had time to spend with my kids all day. I think it was supposed to be like that. It's frustrating, but it was supposed to be like that.
She invited us into her home where she opened up about living with a worm in her brain and how it affected the left side of her brain, causing her to live with short-term memory loss.
I don't know exactly how the worm got into my brain, but according to the neurologist, he asked whether I ate pork, and I don't eat a lot of pork regularly, and then he said, but it's probably from a lettuce leaf. And he says what happens is there are little eggs on lettuce leaves sometimes, and people eat it and regularly, they get it in daily. But it usually just goes out, and sometimes the eggs somehow get into the bloodstream and it goes to whatever organ. Mine went to my left brain.
For years, Santi lived with the worm in her brain and led a normal, healthy life. She was quite an intellectual with a dream to be an accountant.
I studied at Stellenbosch University. I did a BA because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and then eventually I was selected. I did an honours degree after the BA and in psychology, and then in my fifth year I was selected for the course in master's degree in research psychology, which is a lot of stats and all the maths part of the research of the psychology. So then after that, after university, I went looking for work, but nobody wanted to employ me because you don't have any experience. So I went to a company and I said I'll work for them for free. So I worked just to get experience, and I worked there for about 6 months, and then they employed me and they started paying me, and then eventually years after that I became one of the directors of the company.
It was at university that Santi met and fell in love with a man who she later married. She had accomplished her lifelong dream, a picture-perfect family and a successful career, until one particular day that left her fearing for her life.
We were at Franschhoek, apparently. I can't remember any of that, but we were with friends in Franschhoek, and the night I came home and I put my 2-year-old son to bed, and my husband became worried because I didn't come down for a long time, and then he found me in the room and I had an epileptic seizure.
Santi and family at the time were not aware that she had a worm in her brain. The doctor could not confirm what had caused her to have an epileptic seizure. Family and friends grew concerned, and Santi was known as the hardworking woman who was always present when those around her needed her.
After she had her initial fit and she was hospitalized, not being able to know what it is and what caused it, I lost a friend prior to that very recently who had a brain tumor and had a long suffering, and his first symptom was also a fit, and my first thought was that it could be cancer. As I said, not knowing, waiting for the results, and then the initial damage that was done. We weren't sure if it was permanent or if it was long-term. She was very forgetful. She couldn't remember her son's age. that was very, very, very challenging.
After her release from hospital, Santi was scheduled for multiple checkups. Eventually, her neurologist discovered that she had been living with a worm in her brain.
It was in February 2009. I was hospitalized and they did scans, MR scans, and then they saw that there was a worm in my brain. And from then, I can't remember the first part, what happened. I only have recollection of people telling me afterwards, but apparently, I wasn't making a lot of sense at the time.
Santi's life had taken a different course. She could no longer work. She relied on her daughter, who had to assist her with basic mathematics.
Before Nielsen, life was pretty much, it was good. I was working, my husband was working, the kids went to school. We were doing great. I think just like any normal family.
The life she had built was no longer familiar to her. When we return from the ad break, we'll look at how Santi established herself as an author with only one side of her brain fully functional. Stay with us.
GovTech is South Africa's premier ICT event hosted by CETA. Our theme for GovTech 2014 is a government empowered by technology. Our topics will explore e-government, infrastructure and broadband, reducing the cost of ICT and service delivery, best practice, innovation and success stories. Join us at the Durban ICC on 2nd to 5th November 2014. Register now on www.govtech.co.za.
For over 20 years now, South Africa has just been one big construction site, building houses.
This is the only country in the world that provides free housing. The government has done very well in this particular area.
What are the challenges facing human settlements?
Most of the people who move into urban centers are looking for jobs, basically, and that increases the pressure in that particular area. We know exactly what needs to be done where and how it should be done.
They were also building houses for married staff, and you had the married quarters and the hostels. And all of that stopped. What happened?
Nothing has stopped, Mr. Mateza. We cannot solve the housing problems on our own in this country. We cannot wait for government as well.
It's a joint venture, if I were to put it like that, between the public sector and the private sector, particularly in the area of mines.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
Should marijuana be legalized in South Africa or not?
The legalization of dagga is a no to our country. Look at the rate of rape in our country because of people that
But you can't say dagga makes people
that
get
are under
raped
the
then.
influence of dagga.
When a young man comes to you and says, I'm having a problem with dagga, do you send him to jail?
We don't send them to
Then you already concede that you agree that prohibition is not the answer, Ms.
because
Bophelong.
our aim is to help them.
As is ours.
It is you helping them by giving them dagga. How are you going to control this? Just give me a chance. Because if you cannot control it now, as the CYP of South Africa, we say no to the legalization of dagga. No matter what you study, no matter what you tell me, I say no.
Watch Newsroom with me, Eben Janssen, weekdays at 9 a.m. on the SABC News channel.
Welcome back to the show, Bophelong, a place of hope. Before the ad break, Sentinel, who lived with a worm in her brain, took us through events that led to how she discovered the worm that caused her to live with short-term memory loss. In this next insert, she talks about how Nelsie the worm changed her life for the better. Sentinel lived for years with a worm in her brain. The worm erased the left side of her brain, leaving her with short-term memory loss. She relied on her family and friends to pick up the pieces of a life she was once part of.
It wasn't easy. She did a lot of crazy things that you had to get used to and handle in a way to be supportive. For example, she couldn't work with change. If she went to a shop and she had to buy something, she wasn't sure if she got the right amount of change. And if you have someone who's so clever and wise and intelligent to be unable to do a simple thing like that, it's very hard. Driving with her as a passenger was a big challenge. She would stop somewhere and read through her manual in the car without thinking about the other cars. Not that that's much different from before, though.
The love and support from family and friends remained constant throughout her ordeal.
The people close to me are sensitive about it. They would, they know I appreciate it if they phone and say, do you still remember we have to go to the movies on Friday nights? Because I would sometimes forget and I won't show up, and I wouldn't have remembered that they ever told me. So a lot of people, of my close friends, would remind me of things. People that don't know me, just sometimes things, it's socially it's sometimes awkward, because I would meet someone and they would tell me something intimate, like I just got divorced or something, and then the next time I see them I would ask them, so how's your husband? so and then it's awkward because they don't know I have a memory problem, because you can't see it. They call it the silent disease, because you can't see it, and people operate and they still function, but there's just a small part not working somewhere. I'm on manual now, so if I have to remember things, I have to write them down. So I have lists all over the place. I have a diary that I keep. I have a board in the kitchen that I write on. So I write things down, and especially something that bothers me a bit is when I forget experiences. So I'm worried that I will forget things, special moments with the kids or things like that. So I write a lot of that down. I take a lot of photos. So when I read it again, even if I don't remember it, I know it was there. And I call it I think about it as my external hard drive. So I would phone a friend and ask, where did we go that time, or they would fill in my memory for me, or my husband, or I would refer back to something that I wrote to get the information.
The pieces of a puzzle were almost complete. What was remaining was to remove the worm from her brain.
The first couple of weeks, they gave me a lot of medication. I remember vaguely hands full of medication that I had to take every day. And they killed it. They took regular MR scans to see, and it shrunk and it shrunk. There's a mark where it used to be, but it's not, it's very small.
While many may feel saddened by Santi's story, she has managed to find the good in her encounter.
After the injury, the right side of my brain was lightening up, because that's the creative side. I started painting and I started taking photos and I wrote little things, and so it's just, I think all of us have a left and a right side that's maybe you don't use it, but it's there. And my friend said, but why don't you do the course? And I was just retrenched then, and I said, but I'm not going to, I don't want to use money for that, because I don't know where I'm going and when I will work again and that. And within a week she emailed me and she said, but she contacted all my friends and they've got the money together, so I can go and do the course. And then I did the course, a children's writing course by Mariana Brandt, and I wrote a story. There was a story writing competition in the Finesse magazine, and they said you have to write a fairy tale based on your own life. And then I wrote my and Niels's story, and I won the competition. I was one of 3 winners, and from there on, the people who also, all of the people who did the children's writing course from Mariana Brandt came together at one stage. She did the course over years, so we didn't know one another, and we met just for once off, and it was such nice people. We decided we'll keep in contact, and we started working on projects together. We're still meeting regularly. It's been about 4 years now, and we did 2 children's CDs together for 4 to 8 years old, and it's a totally new field because I didn't know anything about how to make children's CDs, and I had to get got a sound engineer to put the sounds in, and we had to get people, actors to read the stories, and so it was fun.
Santi also shared how she has turned her pain into success.
Well, the positive thing is I believe that no matter where you are in life, there's always a path that's leading somewhere, and sometimes you think you're on your way here and you end up there, but you have to trust that you're exactly at the right spot at the right time. So I think that's the biggest lesson that I learned, is you just have to trust, because I mean I wouldn't have written any of these, I wouldn't have met all the creative people that I've met in the last couple of years. At the moment we're also going to schools and less privileged schools, and we talk about books and we give them books and things. I mean, I've never have experienced that. I would have sat at my table doing my stats, which I loved, but I think it was for a purpose.
In Santi's case, it was through lettuce leaves that the worm got into her system and ended up in her brain. But there are many other ways that we all could end up with tapeworms in our bloodstreams, and they could end up in our brain, eyes, nose, and ears. Stay tuned to Bophelong to find out more.
Cultures of Africa, though similar in some ways, are colorful and diverse.
We explore the rich culture, dance and dress of the Tanzanian people of the Mtwara region.
The dance that they're performing is what you will find in the village. And it's not just a paid gig, it's something they do, they enjoy.
Mtwara's late development has left it with a rich reservoir of empirical knowledge of a purer African life.
For whatever the reasons are, it's one of the last areas of the country to develop, and thus traditional arts and traditional culture.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays, 5:40 p.m. on SABC News.
This former breadbasket of Africa, playing host to SADC leaders.
I feel humbled and yet greatly honored at being appointed the chairman of SADC.
When I was a student, Harvard was only my visible college, my former classes. But I was also a student in an invisible college.
The outbreak in West Africa is the world's deadliest to date. It's centered on Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, with cases also reported in Nigeria.
Catch news at 8, 7 days a week. Be informed.
we really know the hype is about the new and how about the new cabinet will actually perform. But what role should then the media be playing at this critical stage?
I would hope that the media will give the newly appointed people a benefit of the doubt.
Has the media lost its respect in this regard? We want you to tell us.
The many factors that are hidden from the public in terms of this ought to be brought out by the media.
Watch Media Monitor with me, Alicia Jali, Sundays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News channel.
Welcome back and thank you for staying with Bophelong, a place of hope. I sat down with Dr. Rauji, a neurologist who gave us an insight into how daily food intake could result in us having tapeworms living for years in our bloodstreams. Let's get straight into it.
How does it come about that a worm would land up in a human being brain?
Well, it depends on the worm. So there's a large number of infections that can affect the brain. The common one that we always see in neurological practice is a worm called cysticercosis, which is the pork tapeworm. And the pork tapeworm is usually acquired by eating certain items. And they'll end up with the egg in your gut. The egg then becomes an adult worm, and in the process of producing more eggs, some of those eggs land up in your bloodstream, and from the bloodstream it ends up going into your brain. So the bottom line is the infection starts off in your gut.
Yeah.
And it's usually infection that comes about by eating something that has been soiled with either pork feces or human feces that has already had the egg in it. The egg then ends up being absorbed into your gut, and in your gut the egg then develops into an adult worm, which then produces more eggs, and that cycle then basically continues. So the life cycle of the worm dictates the pattern in which the infection ends up going to different segments of the body. A lot of the eggs actually land up in muscle, and occasionally an egg lands up in the brain, producing the symptom of seizure.
So doctor, if the worm lands up in your brain, what would be the type of signs that one should look out for?
Well, I think the biggest and most common symptom that patients present with in this particular setting would be epilepsy or a new seizure. So in somebody who's never had a seizure, suddenly presenting with a seizure, that's usually the presentation that we'd expect in this particular setting. And it's a common complication of any infection in the brain, but particularly certain worms in the brain tend to cause seizures.
So how does one prevent such incident?
We've got to have fertilizers that are not human or animal feces, or if it is then properly treated so that those infections are gotten rid of. So what happens is that when you have fertilizer, and if you put it into a heap and it warms up, which it's supposed to do, it kills off those eggs. And you use those sorts of things before we allow that fertilizer to land up in the ground. So I think it's also about farming practice and teaching people how to become better at growing the crops. Unfortunately, by virtue of the fact that the infections are sitting around in your green leafy vegetables and in other vegetables that are being grown in the field, that the source of infection ends up in the human. The problem with that is that the green leafy vegetables from which we get the infection, or from the meat that is not cooked, we then end up getting infected merely because the material wasn't washed, or most importantly is the practices of farming. If we use animal feces as a fertilizer, or if we use human feces as fertilizer, the risk is much higher. So if that is prevented, the infection doesn't end up becoming a problem at all. So I think primary to anything is education at the point where the vegetables are grown.
So does it always does it always end up in short-term memory loss, or is it different cases for different people?
Yes, depending on where the brain infection is. So if the brain infection is in an area that affects memory, you get memory impairment. If the infection is close to the surface of the brain, you get seizures, and so the manifestations can be varied. And the consequences are that once we've treated the infection, you'll end up with a scar, and that scar still can become a source for epilepsy. So our biggest concern in that setting is always epilepsy.
You can send your thoughts on today's story, or perhaps you have suggestions on stories that you would like to see on the show. Our contact details are at the bottom of your screen. And with that, we come to the end of our program. From us here on Bophelong, it's a goodbye.